A multi-million-dollar tech empire was seconds away from crumbling over a plate of Wagyu beef. The hired translator was lying. The CEO was completely blind to the sabotage, and the only person in the room who knew the terrifying truth was the woman holding a pitcher of iced water. The private dining room at L'Etoile Manhattan's most unapologetically exclusive French restaurant was designed to be a fortress of discretion. Soundproof walls lined with velvet, dim, ambient lighting, and an unwritten rule that whatever happened over the $300 tasting menu stayed there. Tonight, however, the heavy atmosphere felt less like a sanctuary and more like a beautifully decorated execution chamber. Nathaniel Harrison subtly wiped a bead of cold sweat from his temple, hoping the dim lighting masked his desperation. At 34, Nathaniel was the CEO of Aegis Innovations, a cybersecurity firm that had been the darling of Silicon Valley exactly 3 years ago. Now, thanks to a catastrophic supply chain failure and a brutal smear campaign led by his chief rival, Dominic Mercer, Aegis was bleeding capital. They were 2 weeks away from missing payroll. Nathaniel's entire legacy, the company he had built from a cramped garage with his late grandfather's inheritance, was hanging by a thread. Sitting across the sprawling mahogany table was his last lifeline. Winston, a notoriously ruthless venture capitalist from a colossal Singaporean holding company. Winston was a man who commanded the room without raising his voice, his sharp eyes scrutinizing Nathaniel's every micro-expression. Winston preferred to conduct his highest-level negotiations in his native Mandarin, relying on his trusted, supposedly impartial corporate translator, Gregory Hayes, to bridge the linguistic divide. Standing quietly in the corner of the room, entirely invisible to the men at the table, was Mia Reynolds. Mia was in her 4th hour of a double shift, her feet aching in standard-issue black leather flats. She was 26, drowning in student loans from a master's degree in international relations, and desperate to keep this waitressing job just to make rent. To the men at the table, she was a ghost in a crisp white apron, a mechanism for delivering truffles and pouring vintage Bordeaux. They didn't know that before her family's finances had evaporated, during a messy legal battle, Mia had spent 7 years living in Beijing and Taipei, absorbing Mandarin until it became a second pulse in her veins. She didn't just speak the language, she understood the nuances, the cultural idioms, and the precise, razor-sharp vocabulary of high-level Asian business negotiations. As Mia silently refilled Winston's water glass, she tuned in to the rhythm of the conversation. Nathaniel leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "Please convey to Winston," Nathaniel said, his voice earnest and strained, "that our proprietary encryption algorithm is fundamentally complete. We just need this bridge capital to scale our server infrastructure. We view this not as a bailout, but as a deeply synergetic long-term partnership. We want to build something lasting together." Mia stepped back, holding her tray against her hip, and waited for Gregory to translate. Gregory was a slickly dressed man in his late 40s, sporting a silk pocket square and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Gregory turned to Winston and spoke in rapid Mandarin. "He says the product is broken and they are out of money. He is begging for your cash to keep the lights on and hopes you will just hand it over without looking too closely at the technical flaws." Mia froze. Her grip on the silver tray tightened so hard her knuckles turned white. She blinked, her mind racing. Did I mishear that she had been out of practice for a year? But business Mandarin wasn't something you simply forgot. The words Gregory used were violently disrespectful. He hadn't just mistranslated Nathaniel's pitch, he had weaponized it. Winston's posture stiffened. A fleeting shadow of disgust crossed his features before he composed himself. He replied in Mandarin, his tone frigid. "If the product is flawed, why should I risk my investors' capital? I am not running a charity for struggling American tech bros." Gregory turned back to Nathaniel, his expression a mask of professional sympathy. "Winston says he is concerned about the timeline, but he is still willing to hear you out regarding your market strategy." Nathaniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, entirely unaware that the bridge between him and his investor was being systematically rigged with explosives. Thank God. "Okay, tell him our market strategy is aggressive. We have a 50% capture rate projected for the enterprise sector within 6 months of launch." Gregory nodded, turning back to Winston. "He arrogant. He claims he will dominate the market in 6 months, but he has no real plan. He thinks you are foolish enough to buy into his empty promises." A cold knot formed in Mia's stomach. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mediocre translator stumbling over industry jargon. This was intentional, calculated sabotage. She retreated to the server station just outside the private room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the small glass pane in the heavy wooden door, she watched the dynamic deteriorate. Nathaniel was throwing his heart and soul into the pitch, bringing out spreadsheets, showcasing data, fighting for the livelihoods of the 200 employees depending on him. And every single time he spoke, Gregory filtered his passion into insults, arrogance, and financial desperation. Why, Mia thought, frantically slicing a lemon at the prep counter. Why would the translator blow up the deal? Then she remembered the name Nathaniel had mentioned earlier in the evening when he was pacing the hallway on a phone call. Dominic Mercer. Mercer was notoriously cutthroat. If Nathaniel's company went bankrupt, Mercer could acquire the patented encryption tech for pennies on the dollar in liquidation. It didn't take a genius to realize Gregory's pockets were likely being heavily lined by Mercer's firm. Mia looked at the clock. It was 8:45 p.m. Her manager, a terrifyingly strict man named Oliver, walked past and snapped his fingers at her. "Reynolds, Table 4 needs their check and the VIP room is ready for the main course. Stop daydreaming. You know the rules, Silent Service. Do not speak unless spoken to or you're fired." "Yes, Oliver," Mia whispered, picking up her serving tray. She needed this job. If she got fired tonight, she would miss her rent payment on Friday. The eviction notices were already piling up. It wasn't her business. It was corporate warfare, a game played by men in $1,000 suits who wouldn't notice if she vanished off the face of the earth. She just had to serve the duck confit, keep her mouth shut, and go home. But as she pushed open the heavy oak door to the private dining room, she looked at Nathaniel. The CEO looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had fought a long, honorable war and was about to be executed by friendly fire. Mia's conscience screamed at her. She couldn't let it happen. The atmosphere inside the room had dropped to freezing. Winston was no longer looking at the financial projections on the table. He was staring at his phone, the universal sign of a billionaire who had decided his time was being wasted. Mia approached the table quietly, balancing 3 plates of meticulously plated duck confit. As she set the first plate down in front of Nathaniel, Winston spoke up, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "I have one final question," Winston said in Mandarin, ignoring the food placed in front of him. "If we proceed, who holds the ultimate authority over the encryption keys, I require a guarantee that my firm will have shared custody of the master override. It is a matter of absolute security." Gregory cleared his throat and turned to Nathaniel. "He wants to know if you are willing to give up your position as CEO if the merger goes through." It was a blatant, outrageous lie. Nathaniel looked like he had been slapped. His face flushed a mix of profound betrayal and desperation warring in his eyes. He had spent years building the company. Relinquishing the CEO position wasn't just a professional demotion, it was a hostile takeover. But he was backed into a corner. If he said no, the company died tomorrow. "Tell him," Nathaniel's voice cracked slightly, and he took a shaky breath to steady himself. Tell him that I am willing to discuss a transition of power, provided my employees are protected, and the core mission of the company remains intact. I will step down if it means Aegis survives. It was a heartbreaking concession, the white flag of a proud founder. Mia, standing just 2 feet away with the final plate in her hands, locked eyes with Gregory. The translator's lips twitched into a microscopic, triumphant smirk. He turned to Winston, preparing to deliver the killing blow. He says you are insulting him. Gregory translated smoothly into Mandarin. He says he will never share power with an outsider, let alone a foreign entity, and that you should take your money and get out. Winston's eyes darkened with absolute fury. He didn't say a word. He simply reached for the linen napkin on his lap, placed it on the table, and stood up. Wait, what's happening? Nathaniel panicked, jumping to his feet. Gregory, what did he say? Where is he going? I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. Gregory sighed, feigning a look of pity. He was deeply offended by your hesitation. He feels you lack the conviction required for this partnership. The deal is off. Winston was already buttoning his suit jacket, turning toward the door. The multi-million-dollar deal, the lives of 200 employees, Nathaniel's entire future, all of it was evaporating into the Manhattan night. Mia couldn't breathe. The injustice of it burned in her chest, hotter than the plated food in her hands. She thought of Oliver, her manager. She thought of her empty bank account. She thought of the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. Then she slammed the tray down onto the serving sideboard. The sharp clatter of silver against mahogany echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. All 3 men froze, whipping their heads around to look at the waitress. Mia didn't cower. She straightened her spine, pulling back her shoulders, shedding the invisible subservient posture of the help. She stepped directly into Winston's path to the door and looked the billionaire dead in the eye. Excuse me, Mr. Winston, Mia said. The words rolled off her tongue in absolutely flawless Beijing-accented Mandarin. The tone was respectful, but commanded undeniable authority. Winston blinked, profoundly startled. He stared at the girl in the apron as if she had just materialized from thin air. Forgive my intrusion, Mia continued in Mandarin, her voice steady and clear. But you are walking away from a man who just offered to sacrifice his entire career to partner with you. He did not insult you. He did not refuse your request. He was completely unaware of what you actually asked, because your translator has been aggressively lying to you for the past 45 minutes. Dead silence engulfed the room. Nathaniel looked wildly between Mia and Winston, completely lost. What is she saying? Gregory's face went paper white. The slick, arrogant demeanor shattered, instantly replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. She's a crazy waitress, Gregory stammered in English, lunging forward to grab Mia's arm. Get out of here, I'm calling the manager. Mia easily sidestepped Gregory's grasp. She didn't break eye contact with Winston. Your question was about the shared custody of the encryption keys, Mia said in Mandarin, speaking rapidly so Gregory couldn't interrupt. This man, she pointed sharply at Gregory, told Mr. Harrison that you were demanding he resign as CEO immediately. And despite that horrific demand, Mr. Harrison agreed because he cares more about his employees than his own ego. In return, your translator told you that Mr. Harrison insulted you and told you to get out. Winston's gaze slowly shifted from Mia to Gregory. The billionaire's eyes were like chips of black ice. Mr. Winston, do not listen to her, Gregory pleaded, switching to Mandarin, sweat visibly pouring down his forehead. She is clearly unwell, a disgruntled employee. Her Mandarin is broken. She misunderstood. My Mandarin is perfect, and you know it. Mia snapped back in the same language. Earlier when Mr. Harrison said he wanted a synergetic long-term partnership, you translated that he was desperate for your cash because his product was broken. You are deliberately tanking this negotiation. Who is paying you? Dominic Mercer. At the sound of Mercer's name, Winston's jaw clenched. He was a veteran of the corporate world. It only took him a fraction of a second to put the pieces together. The sudden, inexplicable hostility, the bizarre responses, the presence of a rival who stood to gain everything. Winston raised a single hand, silencing Gregory's frantic babbling. Winston turned to Nathaniel, who was standing by the table looking utterly bewildered by the rapid-fire foreign exchange happening in front of him. Winston switched to English. It was heavily accented but perfectly intelligible. "Mr. Harrison," Winston said, his voice dangerously low, "did you at any point tonight tell me to take my money and get out?" Nathaniel looked horrified. "What? No, never. I just said I would step down as CEO if you required it to save the company." Winston closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling a long, slow breath. When he opened them, the fury was perfectly controlled, directed entirely at the man sweating next to the table. "Gregory," Winston said softly. It was the kind of soft that preceded a hurricane. "You have exactly 10 seconds to remove yourself from my sight before I make a phone call that will ensure you never work in the financial sector on any continent for the rest of your miserable life." Gregory opened his mouth to defend himself, but the look on Winston's face stopped him dead. The translator grabbed his leather briefcase from the floor and practically bolted out of the room, nearly taking the heavy oak door off its hinges in his haste. The door swung shut, leaving a stunned, breathless silence in its wake. Nathaniel sank slowly back into his chair, the adrenaline draining from his body. He looked at Mia, running a hand through his hair. I don't understand. Who are you?" Before Mia could answer, the door flew open again. It was Oliver, the restaurant manager, his face flushed with anger. He marched straight toward Mia. "Reynolds, what did you do?" "The translator just ran out through the lobby, shouting about you. That's it. You're done. Pack your locker. You are fired." Mia swallowed hard, the reality of her situation crashing back down on her. She had saved the multi-million-dollar deal, but she had just lost the only thing keeping a roof over her head. She untied her apron, her hands shaking slightly, and prepared to walk out. "Excuse me," a booming voice echoed. Oliver stopped mid-rant, turning to Winston with an obsequious, groveling smile. "Sir, I am so deeply sorry for this disruption. I assure you this waitress will never—" "Shut up!" Winston commanded, not even looking at the manager. He gestured to the empty chair where his treacherous translator had just been sitting. Winston looked at Mia, an undeniable spark of respect lighting up his features. "Miss," Winston said, gesturing to the chair, "please sit down. We have a deal to negotiate, and we find ourselves in desperate need of a reliable translator." Oliver stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The power dynamic in the private dining room had shifted so violently he couldn't process it. He looked from Winston's icy glare to Mia, who was still holding her discarded apron. "Sir," Oliver stammered, his voice trembling. "She is not bonded. She is a waitress. It is a severe violation of restaurant policy to allow staff to fraternize." Winston did not raise his voice, but the sheer weight of his authority crushed the manager's protests. "If you do not leave this room in 3 seconds, I will buy this restaurant tomorrow morning, just to have the pleasure of firing you personally. Get out." Oliver fled, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him. The silence returned, but this time it was not the suffocating silence of deceit. It was the breathless quiet of a massive paradigm shift. Mia stepped forward, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She placed her apron on the serving sideboard and walked over to the mahogany table. She pulled out the leather chair, recently vacated by the treacherous Gregory, and sat down. Nathaniel was staring at her utter disbelief, warring with profound gratitude on his face. "I owe you my company," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I owe you everything. I thought I was losing my mind." Mia offered a small professional smile, channeling the diplomatic training she hadn't used in years. "You were being played, Mr. Harrison. Gregory was filtering your passion into desperation, and your concessions into insults. It was a textbook sabotage tactic." Winston poured a measure of vintage Bordeaux into a fresh glass and slid it across the table toward Mia. "To the truth," the billionaire said in English, raising his own glass. He then switched back to his native tongue. "Now, Miss Reynolds, if you would be so kind as to facilitate. Tell Mr. Harrison that I apologize for the hostility. I am deeply impressed by a leader willing to sacrifice his own title to save his people. That is the kind of loyalty my firm invests in." Mia turned to Nathaniel, her voice steady and clear as she delivered the exact translation. She didn't just translate the words. She captured Winston's tone, the newfound respect, the absolute sincerity. Nathaniel's shoulders dropped an enormous weight, lifting from his frame. "Tell him the title means nothing if the ship sinks. My engineers built something revolutionary. Aegis Innovations has the most advanced dynamic encryption protocol on the market. We just need the runway to launch it properly." For the next 3 hours, the private dining room at L'Etoile transformed into a high-stakes war room. Mia was the flawless conduit between two brilliant minds. She translated complex technical jargon, financial projections, and strategic roadmaps with a precision that left both men astounded. She didn't stumble over the nuances of back-end server infrastructure or venture capital equity distribution. Her background in international relations and her years in Beijing gave her an edge that Gregory never possessed. As the clock struck midnight, the plates of duck confit sat cold and untouched, but the table was littered with legal pads covered in numbers and diagrams. Winston leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "We have a framework. I will provide the $40 million bridge capital. In exchange, my firm takes a 30% equity stake and a seat on the board. Mr. Harrison remains CEO, but we establish a joint security committee to oversee the master encryption keys." Mia translated the offer to Nathaniel. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. "Done." Winston smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his stoic features. He reached across the table, extending his hand. Nathaniel met him halfway in a firm, solid handshake. The deal was saved. The company was saved. Winston stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Mr. Harrison, I will have my legal team draft the preliminary paperwork by morning, but before I depart, I must address a critical liability." He turned his sharp gaze toward Mia. "Miss Reynolds, Gregory's betrayal proves that Dominic Mercer is terrified of your technology. Mercer knew he couldn't beat you in the market, so he tried to assassinate you in the boardroom. He will try again." Mia translated for Nathaniel, who frowned, his jaw tightening. "Mercer plays dirty. He's been spreading rumors that our code is unstable to scare off domestic investors. That's why I had to look overseas. Mercer assumes he has won." Winston noted in Mandarin a predatory glint in his eye. "Gregory has surely called him by now to report the deal fell apart. We will use that arrogance against him. We will keep this partnership absolutely confidential until the ink is dry. Let Mercer overextend himself, thinking you are bankrupt. When we announce the merger, his stock will plummet." Mia relayed the strategy. Nathaniel's eyes lit up with fierce determination. "A trap. I love it. Winston nodded respectfully to Mia. You have done us a great service tonight, Miss Reynolds. You are entirely too overqualified to be pouring water. Good evening. With that, the billionaire swept out of the room. Mia was left alone in the room with Nathaniel. The adrenaline was finally beginning to ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She looked at the cold food, the empty wine glasses, and the discarded apron on the sideboard. Reality was creeping back in. She had saved Aegis Innovations, but she was still unemployed, broke and facing eviction. She stood up her legs, feeling like lead. Well, Mr. Harrison, congratulations. I'm glad I could help. Nathaniel stood up quickly, rounding the table to stop her. Wait, please, you can't just leave. You saved my life's work tonight. I don't even know how to begin compensating you for this. Mia offered a tired smile. Just leave a good tip on the way out. My manager fired me about 2 hours ago, but I think I can still claim the gratuity. Nathaniel stared at her, horrified. Fired because you stepped in. Because I broke the silent service rule, Mia corrected gently. It's fine. It was worth it. No, it's not fine. Nathaniel said, his voice firm. Mia, what is your background? You understood the tech jargon perfectly. You didn't just translate. You negotiated. You anticipated Winston's concerns before he even voiced them. I have a master's in international relations, Mia admitted, crossing her arms defensively. I lived in Asia for 7 years. I specialized in cross-cultural corporate communications. But my family went through a brutal bankruptcy a few years ago. I had to drop out of the workforce to deal with the fallout. Now I serve duck. Nathaniel shook his head in disbelief. Not anymore. I need a director of international operations. I need someone who can navigate the Asian markets, someone who understands the culture, the language, and the sheer ruthlessness of the players involved. I need someone I can trust. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. Be at my office at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll discuss your signing bonus. It will be enough to cover whatever financial troubles you have, I promise you. Mia looked down at the embossed card in her hand. Nathaniel Harrison, CEO. Aegis Innovations. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, nodding slowly. I'll be there. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in corporate warfare. Mia arrived at the Aegis headquarters, a bustling tech hub in Brooklyn, and was immediately thrust into the inner circle. Her signing bonus cleared the next day, instantly halting her eviction and wiping out her most pressing debts. But there was no time to celebrate. They had a trap to spring. Operating under Winston's advice, Aegis maintained a facade of complete panic. Nathaniel leaked a fake memo to a known corporate spy within his own ranks, suggesting the company was preparing to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy by Friday. Dominic Mercer took the bait-hook line and sinker. Assuming Aegis was dead in the water, Mercer's firm aggressively shorted Aegis stock and publicly announced their own revolutionary security software, heavily relying on the assumption that their only real competitor was out of the game. Mercer even gave a smug interview to a major financial network, lamenting the tragic downfall of Nathaniel Harrison's little startup. On Thursday morning, the trap snapped shut. Aegis Innovations and Winston's holding company issued a joint press release announcing the $40 million partnership. They didn't just announce the funding. They dropped the bombshell that Aegis's encryption protocol was fully operational and had already been integrated into Winston's massive Asian infrastructure network. The financial world exploded. Mercer's firm was caught completely exposed. Their aggressive short-selling strategy backfired catastrophically. Within hours, Mercer's stock tanked by 22%. Panic set in, as investors realized Mercer's new software was entirely inferior to the fully funded, fully operational Aegis protocol. Mia sat in her new glass-walled office overlooking the Brooklyn skyline, watching the financial news networks cover the bloodbath. Nathaniel walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked completely revitalized, the dark circles under his eyes replaced by a triumphant energy. "Mercer just called my private line," Nathaniel said, handing her a coffee. He was screaming, threatening lawsuits, claiming insider trading, the whole works. I just let him yell, and then I asked him to pass my regards to Gregory. Mia laughed, taking a sip of the coffee. Gregory is probably halfway to Antarctica by now. Winston's legal team is ruthless. He got exactly what he deserved, Nathaniel said, his expression sobering as he looked at Mia. And so did we. We wouldn't be here without you, Mia. You didn't just translate a meeting. You completely changed the trajectory of this company. You fought for us when you had no reason to. Mia looked out at the city, the afternoon sun reflecting off the skyscrapers. Just 3 days ago, she was a ghost in a white apron, terrified of an eviction notice, invisible to the men making multi-million-dollar decisions around her. Now she was one of those decision-makers. I just hated the silence, Mia said softly. Gregory was using the silence between you two as a weapon. I just decided it was time to make some noise. Nathaniel smiled, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. Well, Director Reynolds, let's keep making noise. The waitress, who had been explicitly told to remain silent, had spoken up, and in doing so, she had not only saved a tech empire from ruin, but had also rewritten the script of her own life. The glass ceiling hadn't just been broken, it had been shattered by a silver tray and perfect Mandarin. The truth can be hidden, but it only takes one brave voice to shatter $1 million lie. Maya risked everything to stop corporate sabotage, proving that the most invisible person in the room often holds the most power. If this intense, real-life drama kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling tales.